Welcome to the South Florida M&A Advisors Podcast, your trusted M&A team. Here's your host, Russell Cohen.
Finding the right buyer for a business is not luck, it's strategy. Today we're talking about how M&A advisors actually connect with serious buyers, from private equity to strategic acquirers. Russell, most people probably think that when it comes time to sell a business, you list it like you would a property maybe on MLS and hope that somebody bites. And you and I know that really it couldn't be further from the truth. So what does it really look like behind the scenes when you're trying to find the right buyer?
That's a great question. If you're trying to sell a smaller business, that's exactly what a business broker would do. They would list it on many different websites, and the buyers would flow to them, inquiring by email. That does not work for M&A. In M&A, you have to spend some, probably $30,000 to $50,000 a year in subscriptions that you'll be able to search and try to find the private equity group or family office or strategic buyer. So that's kind of, if you're going to have your toe in the water, you might spend for one service. But if you're really truly going to be able to give your client the most competitive multiple bidders, then building your buyer list, you got to have a lot of different subscriptions to get as many buyers and get the best price, of course.
So how early in this process do you start building a buyer list? Is this something that, well, I'd imagine you've been doing this a while. You have a giant resource directory of these things, but is that groundwork typically laid before the business even goes to market, or how does that typically work with the buyer list?
When you're meeting with a seller, and if you want to show some competitive advantage, you could start building that list really early and share the list in person. You don't give the list to the seller; they haven't signed up with it, but you could show them the amount of private equity groups or strategic buyers that you plan to reach out to, and that could help you get the engagement. A lot of the times, if we're not doing that, we wait for the seller to commit. No need to spend so much time researching buyers if they haven't committed to your company. So the buyer list typically is done after the commitment, because there's a lot of time in between getting the executive summary together and going out there and putting the list together and then finally reaching out to the private equity group. So there is probably a good 30 days that you can really go out there and search for buyers.
So you referenced spending tens of thousands of dollars in access to these resources. So I want to dig in a little bit into that. What specific platforms or databases do you turn to when you're sourcing private equity or strategic buyers?
Good question. The number one resource for M&A advisors is Private Equity Info. And what that is a database of private equity groups that have made platform investments where you can do the research and you can see what type of add-ons that they're looking to do and where they're focusing their verticals on. So it's very user-friendly. Private Equity Info probably could range from $2,000 to $5,000 a month very easily. And that's one of the sources I use. And we get at the M&A Source, which is a national organization. If you join the M&A Source, you get it for free. So that's an incredible benefit. So you don't have to spend that money. You just have to join. Pitchbook is very well known in the M&A industry. Their minimum requirements, you got to buy 3 licenses, and that will cost $30,000 plus. So if you're just a one person M&A firm, that you won't buy it because you have to buy 3 licenses. And that, if you're not going to even use the license. So usually the larger M&A agencies, advisors are, with multiple M&A advisors would buy the Pitchbook. Tagnify has recently come into the marketplace, and it's kind of a competitor to Private Equity Info and private company data. And they're only charging $500 a month if you want to go month by month. So that's kind of it's a very fair cost because you don't have to commit tremendous amount of dollars, and if you pay for a year up front, you'll be able to get little discount. On the private company data, there are SourceScrub and Grata, and I could tell you for a fact, SourceScrub runs about $20,000 a year, which gets expensive, right? My firm is currently using SourceScrub. Grata, these are all private companies. If you're trying to find strategic buyers that are in the space already, and that would be, instead of private equity, you can, let's say if you're selling a printing company, another printer would come in and buy it. So you got to have the ability to source around the United States, maybe even outside the United States. So Grata, easily 15 to 20 grand if you're not part of any buying group. You also have Apollo.io, which is another private company data information that can run a couple of grand. You got Zoom Info, and they all put limits on how much you could download. But one of the most positives about these private company data companies is, you could try to get the company data for your buyers, but you could also use it on reverse to market the sellers. So it's just not a buyer search. If you're focusing on, let's say, roofing companies, like I've done in the past, I can pull up all the roofers, let's say in the state of Florida, I could target market. So those private company data, Apollo, Zoom Info, SourceScrub, Grata, are you kind of can work it both ways. So so it can get really expensive, and a lot of people don't have unlimited budgets, of course.
Yeah, obviously lots of resources out there. So like I got the wheels churning in my head about obviously the larger the firm, the more access they have to these resources, right?
Right.
So like, what is it safe to say that if you're a smaller business, it would make, like, I don't know how the commission structure works for the M&A advisor, but is it safe to say that for like a smaller business, they might pair better with like a smaller boutique type firm? Whereas if you're doing a larger deal, it would make sense to do it with a larger business? Or how does that typically work? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages to working with a larger entity versus a more like localized boutique type shop?
Listen, I consider myself a boutique M&A. So, so I'm not sitting with 20 different advisors.
But you still have access to a lot of these tools.
I got these subscriptions. I got the power of a larger M&A agency
with the personal nature of dealing with somebody.
Right. Someone local.
The best of both worlds, essentially.
You get the best of both worlds.
With you, Russell, we always get the best of both worlds.
That's right. You're hiring me, and you're getting a boutique style M&A firm, and we have the sources that a larger company would have, because we made the investments in those. In order to be an M&A advisor, you got to have it. You can't have your toe in the business like many people are doing these days. So it's very important. And just to mention, there's a couple of different ways, creative ways to find buyers. You could join ACG, which is kind of like a middle market association, and they have something called DealMax. Every region of ACG network has kind of like a deal market, where they have like a conference twice a year, and they get all the private equity groups to come down to these conferences. And I mentioned M&A Source. We have a conference. I'm on the board of governors of M&A Source, and we have 2 conferences a year. So I just came back from Orlando back in May, and we had a deal market, and we had over 40 private equity groups sitting at a table where I can carry on a conversation one-on-one, explain what I have now, what I have coming, and most important, we're building these relationships with. When you first start, you didn't know any of these private equity groups, and they all keep coming back. And now, 5 to 7 years later, I know these people by first name. I know what they're looking for. We're building relationships with these private equity, and they want that because they want us to call them when we get that opportunity. So as you dedicate more time, you get to know the private equity groups. There's 8,000 of them. You'll never get to know them all, but a handful of them, you'll be able to know them by first name and understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Kind of leads me to the next question I had, which was, and I'm just based upon what you just said, it seems pretty obvious that like having these relationships with these private equity groups, it seems to be, I don't want to say more important than the various resources and tech you have to find buyers, but it seems like you have to strike a nice balance between these personalized relationships with these large groups and also having access to all these platforms to get view and get access to those that you don't have relationships with, so you can connect with them and then build.
That's right.
Relationships.
Yeah, just because if I know 50 private equity groups by their first name doesn't mean that they're investing in the space. So once you join these type of associations, we're getting emails by private equity groups, family offices on a daily basis. So we're building our own database of reach out on top of the search that we do.
So once you have this resource directory and you have all these resources, obviously there's, like you said, now there's people that are reaching out to you. What's your approach to filtering out like time wasters, those that really aren't necessarily qualified, and really zeroing in on the serious buyers? Like, how do you filter through all this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when we're carrying on these conversations, we want to know if they're funded. If they're a funded private equity group, that means they already raised the money from their investors and they got a fund ready to go with dry powder. And typically, a private equity group is only going to put 30% of whatever the down payment in the acquisition. They're only going to put 30%, and then they're going to get leverage. So they don't they don't use 100% of their down payment money right from the fund. It's a leverage play, no different if you were selling a small business and a private individual is using SBA. So that's the way it is. Private equity groups do provide probably a 70 to 80% cash out position, but they're actually not using 100% of their own cash to fund the down payment. So you need to understand that. If you don't understand that, you really don't know the basics of private equity, and beware of the advisor you hire. So yeah, that's the way it is. When I was new, I did not know that. So you learn by getting educated and going through a few deals and going to all these conferences and getting educated, and so you could be better for your seller.
What would be something that instantly turns buyers off, even if the business looks great on paper?
Yeah, I mean, you get a perfect example, an EBITDA of $2 to $5 million. Problem is, they'll be turned off automatically if it's in a space that they're not interested in. If they don't want to buy a franchise chain, let's call it that way. Not many private equity groups want to be in the restaurant business, so that's a turnoff. If they have a vertical in construction, well, they're not going to want to buy an industrial manufacturing company. You know what I mean? So those are turnoffs, like instantaneous. A lot of times when I talk to private, I go, what are the businesses that are like totally not interested, like turnoffs, and they'll tell you what they're not interested in. And a lot of times these private equity groups, they have multiple platforms going on, so they're adding on companies that match the platform investment.
Let's go to some real life examples here. Can you share with us an example of a situation with a deal where you had to get creative and go outside the usual channels to get the deal done?
Yeah, there was a time many years back where I was selling an online company, and I couldn't get through to the one of the buyers that I was really targeting. So I decided to, walk in the door. So hey, let's go directly to them and work my way through. So that's a creative way of trying to get to the buyer. Typically we're reaching out by email, sending the teaser. We are, sometimes there's some phone follow up to see that. But they're kind of like getting in front of someone that way is pretty unique, but it would have, obviously all these buyers could be around the country, so that would be difficult to do. This scenario was a local South Florida company.
So how common is it in your industry to have smaller businesses, I guess, like under 10 million deals, or even smaller, maybe $1 million, $2 million deals, where the owners aren't using a broker, right? They're going about it on their own. And then for those types of scenarios, what do business owners typically get wrong about how buyers are actually found? Yeah,
that's a great question. They're probably tapping their network of accountant and lawyers and who they know, and that's a very less than 1% of the marketplace. So they're really limiting themselves. It may work. But chances are it won't work. So if you're trying to get the most eyes on the prize, and that being your business, you get to an advisor like myself, where we can we can find, many private equity groups, many strategic buyers, depending on your industry. And just by reaching out to your accountant and attorney, because you don't want to pay a commission, it will be made up really well between your accountant and your attorney when they get involved in the deal. So, you're short selling the value of your company because you haven't created enough stir and competition to the deal, and you're limiting your worldwide marketplace. Just because your accountant and attorney are great people doesn't mean they know everyone.
Is that something that's common though for these smaller businesses, or would you say that a majority of them, if they're going to sell, they typically will get an advisor on board?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in an M&A deal, you should have an advisor.
Well, yeah, it seems fairly obvious, but I know there's a lot of business owners out there that are looking to cut corners and save costs and think, people think they could do things on their own. Obviously, from where I'm sitting, you want an expert on your team. But how common is it for business owners with smaller?
I would say on the smaller businesses, maybe under 500,000, they try to do it on their own. On an M&A world, you're dealing with professional buyers. These people who are part of private equity, they went to really incredible schools. They started in private equity. They started from the bottom, and they're working their way through. Almost, a lot of them own these private equity companies, so they do this for a living. Okay, it's like let me give you in football terms. Tom Brady is the professional buyer, and the junior high football defensive lineman is the seller. Okay, you have no chance. Okay, you have no chance to sack Tom Brady because these guys, these private equity buyers know their business, and they're professional, but because they know their business, you can be taken advantage of. And most important, the competitive nature of getting the best price is important. But not always the price is important, that I learned. Sometimes it's the right fit culture-wise with the private equity group and owners trusting each other with the buyers, that they can see the growth of their company. Most people want the money, and some sellers want the second bite of the apple, getting a good private equity group in there and letting their company grow to levels they never thought, and then selling the business 7 to 10 years and making more money. So I learned very well that it's just not about the money. It's the individual person, what their goals are.
Yeah, for sure. What else did I miss anything here? What am I leaving out here?
I think we covered it all. A lot of these subscriptions are important, but you got to do a lot of networking. I'm currently a member of ACG, M&A Source. I've taken a position on the board of governors as the membership chairperson. So you want someone that's active in the space, that is always getting educated, and a real commitment to their profession. And that's, these are simple questions that you could ask any M&A advisor that you're interviewing.
All right, very cool. So we shall leave it at that. Very good stuff. As always, important to get a trusted professional to come in there and help you with these complicated, complex transactions. So everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. And if you found this useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. You know the drill. Appreciate you joining us, and we will catch everyone next time on the next episode of the South Florida M&A Advisors Podcast. Everyone take care. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the South Florida M&A Advisors Podcast. For more information, visit southfloridama.com or contact 954-646-7651.